The young boy sat quietly by the window of the plane, watching the cityscape below disappear into the distance. His mother, sitting next to him, occasionally glanced over, making sure he was comfortable. He was used to flying, though not in luxury. The plane was old, the seats were cramped, and the air smelled faintly of mildew and stale coffee. Still, to him, it was an adventure. His mother, a hard-working woman, had arranged this trip to a city far from their small hometown, where the chances of a better life seemed to be just within reach. It was a hopeful, if uncertain, journey. They had little money, but the boy's mother had been able to scrape enough together for the ticket. The boy's life, up until now, had been shaped by the constant battle of managing expectations with reality. Raised in a modest neighborhood, he had learned early on that dreams are luxuries for the fortunate. The boy's passion for singing had always been there, a gift that came naturally, though it was a gift he rarely shared. His mother had always told him that dreams are for the rich. When he sang in the privacy of his room, he felt as though he were touching something beyond his reach, something unattainable. But life wasn't about dreams for him, it was about survival. The boy's selflessness was evident in the way he interacted with others. He never sought attention for his kindness, never asked for anything in return. Even on this plane, where there were no strangers to him, he quietly offered the small snacks his mother had packed for the trip to the person sitting next to him. It was just the way he was. Despite the hunger he often felt at home, he would give away what little he had if he thought it would help someone else feel a little better. The contrast between his humble life and the world outside the plane window couldn't have been more stark. Outside, there were cities, businesses, opportunities that seemed light years away from the boy's own world. He thought about the people he knew back home. They worked hard, barely scraping by, yet still finding ways to support one another in the community. He often wondered if there was any real hope of rising above it. As the plane began to climb higher into the sky, the boy leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes for a moment. He was used to being in planes, though the circumstances always left him with a bittersweet feeling. It wasn't the type of travel that represented a vacation or a dream coming true. It was the kind of travel that had a destination marked by an uncertain future. Still, he didn't let it dampen his spirit. He was used to things not being easy. Then, the cry pierced the calm of the cabin. A baby, somewhere a few rows ahead, started wailing loudly. At first, it was just a sound that came and went in waves, but it quickly became clear that the infant wasn't going to stop. The crying echoed off the walls, reverberating around the small, confined space. Some of the passengers groaned, others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The baby's cries grew louder and more insistent, the noise swelling like an unruly force that seemed to be growing with every passing moment. The boy's mother gave him a quick glance, her face creasing into a faint expression of discomfort, though she didn't show it outwardly. She wasn't bothered by the baby's cries in the way some of the other passengers were. She had always been calm in difficult situations, a trait the boy admired. But he could tell that even she was starting to feel the weight of the situation as the crying continued unabated. As the minutes passed, the tension in the cabin grew palpable. People tried to read, some fumbled with their headphones, and others gazed out of the windows in an attempt to escape the noise. The boy, however, did not mind. He had a different way of processing the discomfort. He was used to living in a world where things didn't always go as planned, where the sound of the world's problems could get too loud. The baby's cry, for him, was just another noise, a background hum in a life that often felt chaotic. The passengers around him began to shift more noticeably in their seats. Some shot irritated looks toward the baby's parents, who were doing their best to calm the infant. But the baby would not be calmed. Each wail only seemed to drive the frustration in the cabin deeper. The boy observed this with a mix of curiosity and sadness. He thought about how each person aboard the plane had their own life, their own struggles and stories. Some might be traveling for business, while others might be going to visit family or for some other reason he couldn't know. But in that moment, all their lives were temporarily intertwined in the small, confined space of the plane. The crying baby was the catalyst for the discomfort they all shared. The boy could see how small things like a baby's cry or an unexpected turn of events could cause ripples in a place that was meant to be calm, even routine. The baby's cries continued to pierce the silence of the cabin, rising in volume. For the passengers, it seemed to become a representation of all the frustrations they had carried with them. The boy thought about this as the noise echoed through his ears, but unlike the others, he did not become agitated. His life had taught him to endure, to find a way to live with discomfort, to get used to it. He knew there was no point in trying to change the circumstances around him. Things were what they were, and the world would not bend to his wishes. As the boy sat there, his mind wandered to the journey ahead. His mother had explained that this was an opportunity for them to start fresh. The city they were headed to had more possibilities, more opportunities, or at least the chance to make a living. Yet, even as the thought of a new start gave him a small glimmer of hope, there was an overwhelming sense of uncertainty. He was used to being an outsider, to fitting into spaces where he didn't always belong. What if the new place didn't have room for someone like him? What if his dreams of singing were nothing more than a distraction from the harshness of reality? The plane lurched slightly as it ascended, and the boy's thoughts were interrupted by another loud cry from the baby. The boy's mind drifted back to the moment at hand. He watched the reactions of the people around him, noting how each person's patience grew thinner, how each new cry seemed to wear away at the collective sense of calm. It was strange, how something as simple as a cry from a baby could cause so much disruption in the world. Yet, in the boy's quiet, humble existence, he knew that the world was full of small interruptions that, once passed, left behind no trace except for the residue of the feelings they had stirred. The tension in the cabin grew as the baby's cries seemed to blend into the background, becoming less a source of irritation and more a symbol of the larger forces at work. In that moment, the boy understood something deeply. It was not just the baby's cries that disrupted the plane, it was everything in life that could unexpectedly break the stillness, forcing people to react, to adjust, to cope with what was beyond their control. And maybe, just maybe, that was the story of his life as well, living in a world where things often seemed beyond his control, where small dreams collided with larger forces. The boy sat tensely in his seat, his small fingers tightly gripping the armrest as his eyes scanned the restless passengers around him. The rhythmic hum of the airplane had been a constant source of comfort for the journey, but now, as the minutes dragged on, it seemed to have transformed into a suffocating noise that only amplified the discomfort filling the cabin. His mother, sensing his unease, glanced down at him, her face softening with reassurance. "It's okay, sweetie," she murmured, her voice a quiet lull against the backdrop of the escalating tension. But her words did little to calm the storm of anxiety inside him. The baby's cries pierced the air, growing louder with each passing minute. The boy winced at the sound, the high-pitched wail echoing in his ears. Around him, other passengers shifted in their seats, exchanging impatient glances and muttered complaints. The flight attendants were doing their best to soothe the child, but their efforts only seemed to heighten the frustration in the cabin. The boy could sense the growing irritation, the silent impatience that hung in the air like a thick fog. Everyone wanted silence, but it was as if the baby's cries had taken on a life of their own, refusing to be silenced. He could feel the tension seeping into his own chest. His body tensed in response to the collective unease. The discomfort was palpable, and as much as he wanted to retreat into the safety of his own thoughts, he couldn't ignore the feeling that something needed to be done. He didn't know what he was, just a boy, after all. But the noise, the frustration, the anxiety, it was all building up inside him, and he couldn't sit idly by. His mind raced. What if I do something? The thought crept into his mind, a flicker of an idea that sparked just long enough to make him wonder. What if his voice, his singing, could somehow help? It was a thought that seemed both absurd and comforting at the same time. He had never sung in front of people before, not beyond the safe confines of his home or the small audience of his family. But maybe, just maybe, it could be the thing that broke the tension, the thing that brought some relief to the chaotic atmosphere. The idea seemed to gain weight in his mind as he imagined it. He could picture himself standing up in the aisle, his voice rising above the crowd, cutting through the frustration like a blade. He had a good voice, didn't he? He had been told so, anyway. His mother always praised him for the songs he sang at home, and sometimes his classmates would even ask him to sing during recess. But singing in front of people, especially strangers on a plane? That was different. Much different. Doubt began to creep in. What if they laugh at me? The thought felt like a heavy stone sinking to the bottom of his stomach. He wasn't sure if he could handle that kind of rejection. In the safety of his bedroom, surrounded by familiar faces, he could sing with abandon. But this was different. He would be exposed, vulnerable. And the stakes seemed so much higher in a confined space like this, where there was no escape from the reactions of others. What if his voice cracked? What if he forgot the words? What if no one cared at all? His internal battle raged on as the tension in the cabin continued to build. The baby's cries grew louder, and the passenger's discomfort seemed to swell with every passing moment. He could feel his pulse quickening, his breath coming in short bursts as the anxiety threatened to consume him. The boy closed his eyes for a moment, trying to steady himself, but all he could hear was the baby's wail and the muffled murmurs of the passengers around him. The cabin felt smaller, as if the walls were closing in on him. He wanted to help, to do something, but the weight of his doubts held him in place. His mother noticed the tightness in his shoulders and placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Sweetheart, I know it's hard, but it's okay. It will pass," she said, her voice still calm but tinged with concern. She didn't fully understand the depth of his discomfort, the way the anxiety was gnawing at him from the inside. She didn't know that he was wrestling with something much bigger than the noise around them. It wasn't just the baby's cry, it was everything. The uncertainty that clung to him like a shadow, the feeling that he didn't matter, that he was invisible. The boy had always felt like he was on the outside, looking in, never quite able to connect with those around him. And now, faced with the possibility of doing something so vulnerable, so exposed, the fear of being judged seemed insurmountable. He shifted in his seat, his gaze returning to the baby, who was still crying, still inconsolable. The boy's thoughts began to race again. Could I really do it? Could I actually stand up and sing? Would it help? The question lingered in his mind like a fragile thread, caught between his desire to help and his fear of failure. He imagined the faces of the passengers, tired, frustrated, some even annoyed. What would they think of him, this little boy who dared to break the silence with his voice? And what if his voice wasn't enough? What if it didn't soothe the child, didn't calm the room? What if it only made things worse? The boy's hands trembled slightly as he fidgeted with the hem of his shirt. The internal struggle was exhausting. What do I have to lose? The thought slipped in like a quiet whisper, just enough to quiet the storm of doubt swirling inside him. Maybe he didn't have to be perfect. Maybe he just had to try. Maybe it will make a difference, even if it's just for a moment. And so, with a deep breath, the boy made a decision. He would sing. Not for anyone else, not to prove anything, but to calm himself, to find peace in the chaos. The fear was still there, gnawing at him, but the desire to help, however small the action might be, was stronger. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, grounding himself, and then, with a voice that trembled at first but gained strength with each note, he began to sing. The words flowed out softly at first, tentative and uncertain, but they grew steadier, more confident, as he focused on the melody and the simple act of singing. The boy's voice filled the cabin, cutting through the noise and the tension, a quiet beacon of calm amidst the storm. For a brief moment, the crying stopped. The passengers grew still, and the boy continued to sing, his voice rising and falling, a lullaby in the midst of chaos. He didn't know if it would change anything, but in that moment, it didn't matter. He had done something, something small yet significant, and for the first time in a long while, he felt like he had a place in this world. The baby's cries continued unabated, echoing through the cramped cabin, a relentless wail that seemed to grow louder with every passing minute. The noise, piercing and inconsolable, created a palpable sense of unease among the passengers. With every sob, the discomfort of the flight became more intense. It wasn't just the baby's cries that were starting to wear people down, it was the inability to make them stop. The flight attendants, usually calm and composed under pressure, seemed to be at a loss. They spoke in soothing tones to the mother, tried rocking the child gently, and even offered comfort items, but nothing worked. The cries only grew more frantic, and the passengers' patience began to thin. Whispers started circulating through the cabin. Some passengers exchanged frustrated glances, others muttered under their breath, and a few even audibly complained. There was an undercurrent of agitation that was slowly becoming too loud to ignore. Some passengers were gritting their teeth, trying to block out the sound with their earphones, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, visibly irritated. The sense of frustration hung thick in the air, settling into the very fabric of the flight. In the midst of all this, the boy sat, clutching the armrest of his seat, his knuckles white. He was deeply torn. On one hand, he understood the discomfort the passengers were experiencing. The cries were getting unbearable, and the atmosphere in the cabin was growing more tense by the minute. On the other hand, he couldn't shake the feeling of fear creeping up on him. His stomach churned, and his palms felt clammy. He was just a kid, after all. What could he do? What if his attempt to help made things worse, or worse yet, what if he embarrassed himself? He could already hear the judgments in his head, the snide comments, the mocking laughter, the dismissive glances. Despite his fear, something inside him urged him to act. His heart told him that this was his moment, his chance to do something, anything, to help. The baby's cries were not just annoying anymore, they were heartbreaking, and the frustration of the other passengers seemed to add a layer of hopelessness to the already charged atmosphere. He looked around the cabin, searching for some kind of cue, some kind of signal that someone else would step in, but no one did. The flight attendants were still trying to calm the child, but nothing was working. The passengers were growing restless, and no one seemed to know what to do. The boy took a deep breath. He had an idea, one that seemed as crazy as it did simple. It was a long shot, but it was the only thing he could think of. He had seen this before. His mother, when he was upset as a child, would sing to him softly. It worked then. Could it work now? Could he help this baby, this exhausted mother, and maybe even calm the anxious passengers, all with the power of a song? He wasn't sure, but there was only one way to find out. He stood up, his legs shaky beneath him. The low hum of the plane seemed to intensify the quiet anxiety swirling in the cabin. His heart pounded in his chest as he made his way toward the front of the plane, each step feeling like a small victory over his own fear. The flight attendants were still trying their best, but they paused when they saw the boy approach. He hesitated for a moment, then spoke, his voice barely audible at first. Could I try singing to the baby?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. There was a brief moment of stunned silence. The flight attendants exchanged glances, and the passengers grew still. The hum of the plane seemed to fade for a second, leaving only the distant sound of the baby's cries and the boy's soft, tentative words hanging in the air. It wasn't an idea anyone had expected, and for a moment, no one knew how to respond. The flight attendants, still somewhat uncertain, nodded cautiously. "If you think that might help," one of them said, her voice filled with both curiosity and skepticism. With their approval, the boy slowly turned and made his way toward the mother and child. The passengers, sensing something unusual was about to happen, leaned forward in their seats. The baby's cries had not subsided, but there was a noticeable shift in the cabin's energy. For the first time, the passengers were not exchanging looks of annoyance but waiting, hoping for anything that could offer a solution. The boy knelt beside the mother, who looked exhausted, her face streaked with tears of frustration and fatigue. Her eyes were wide with surprise at the boy's approach, and she gave him a questioning look, as if unsure of his intentions. "It's okay," the boy said softly, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I think I can help." He wasn't sure what he was doing, only that he had to try. He cleared his throat and began to hum softly, unsure at first, testing the waters. His voice was shaky, but as he continued, it grew steadier. The melody was simple, a lullaby his mother had sung to him countless times when he was younger. Slowly, he began to sing the words, his voice trembling at first but gradually becoming more confident. The sound of his voice, gentle and soothing, filled the small space around them. The baby, still crying at first, gradually quieted down. The mother looked at the boy, her expression a mixture of surprise and gratitude, as her baby's cries softened into a series of quiet whimpers. As the boy sang, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted. The passengers, who had been on edge, began to relax. The tension that had gripped the cabin was beginning to dissolve, and a sense of calm spread through the air. The baby's cries, now almost completely gone, were replaced by the soft sound of the boy singing. The other passengers, some of whom had been frustrated moments before, now sat in rapt attention, watching as the boy performed this small, yet powerful act of kindness. The boy's internal conflict was far from over. He had faced his fear and taken the risk, but there was still a lingering uncertainty. Would the baby fall asleep? Would the mother be able to find peace in this small moment? But as the boy continued to sing, he realized that it didn't matter whether he succeeded perfectly. What mattered was that he had acted, had chosen to step forward despite his doubts and fears. In that moment, he understood something important: sometimes, doing what feels right, even in the face of fear, is the most powerful thing a person can do. The cries had stopped. The baby was now peacefully asleep in the mother's arms, and the passengers were beginning to settle back into their seats, their frustration melting away. The boy, still a little shaken, sat back down, his heart still racing, but a quiet pride filling his chest. He had faced his fears, and in doing so, he had not only calmed the baby but had also brought a sense of peace to the entire cabin. The stakes had been high, but the reward, this moment of shared humanity, was something far more significant. The boy starts singing softly, his voice hesitant at first, unsure of how it will be received by the other passengers on the plane. The plane, normally a place of hurried movement and impatient passengers, is now suspended in a quiet tension, a stillness created by the distressing cries of a baby. The sound of the baby's wails cuts through the air, making the journey feel heavier, more uncomfortable, and increasingly filled with frustration. People have grown restless, exchanging looks of irritation, some muttering under their breath. But then, as the boy begins to sing, the tone of the cabin changes. His voice, though not loud or commanding, seems to ripple through the air, carrying a gentle sense of calm. It isn't just a lullaby, it's more than that. His song, though simple, seems to carry a message of hope, a balm for the frayed nerves of the passengers. As the first few notes fill the air, the baby's cries begin to slow, as if the boy's voice is gently soothing the infant's distress. The transformation in the atmosphere is palpable. The tension that had once gripped the cabin slowly starts to dissipate, replaced by a fragile sense of peace. The passengers, who had been on edge just moments before, now listen more attentively to the boy's song. Some of them even stop what they are doing, their eyes following the boy, visibly moved by this unexpected display of vulnerability. There is something about the simplicity and sincerity of the moment that strikes them. The boy, who had initially been unsure of his ability to make a difference, now sees the effect his voice is having on the people around him. The crying baby is not the only one being calmed. The mood of the entire cabin shifts from frustration to something quieter, more reflective. This is a turning point for the boy, a moment where he begins to understand the power of his own voice. It's not just that he has managed to quiet the baby or that the passengers have found some momentary relief in the song, it's that he has, for the first time, used his voice to affect the world around him. The boy has always felt small, unnoticed, unsure of his place in the grand scheme of things. He has often questioned his worth, wondering if he could offer anything of value to others. But now, in this small, confined space, surrounded by strangers, he realizes that his voice has the ability to influence people in a way he had never imagined. There's something deeply humbling about this realization. He doesn't have to be loud or forceful. His song doesn't need to be perfect. It's the act of offering something genuine, something heartfelt, that makes a difference. In that moment, the boy understands that even the smallest gesture, the simplest act of sharing something personal, can have a profound impact. His voice, once a source of self-doubt and insecurity, is now something he can rely on to create change. However, just as the atmosphere in the cabin begins to settle, the boy is faced with another challenge, an unexpected turbulence. The plane suddenly shakes, and the calm that had just begun to settle over the passengers is violently disrupted. The jolt of the plane causes everyone to grab onto their seats, the air filled with gasps and nervous whispers. The boy, who had for a moment felt a sense of connection with those around him, is once again thrown into uncertainty. The turbulence doesn't just shake the plane physically, it shakes him emotionally as well. In that moment, the boy feels the full weight of what has just transpired. The sense of calm he had created feels fragile, and he wonders if it will be just as easily lost as it was found. The turbulence symbolizes the unpredictability of life, how quickly things can go from calm to chaotic, from hopeful to fearful. The boy, caught in this physical and emotional turmoil, is forced to confront his own fears. Is his power, his ability to affect others, real? Or was it just a fleeting moment, something that came about purely by chance? As the plane continues to shake, the boy realizes that the turbulent patch is not just a test of the passenger's ability to remain calm, but also a test of his own. Can he hold on to the sense of peace he created, even when everything around him seems to fall apart? Can he continue to believe in the value of his voice, even when it feels as though everything is in flux? It's in this moment, amid the turbulence, that the boy makes a choice. Instead of allowing fear to take over, he decides to hold on to the clarity he felt when he sang. He realizes that the turbulence, both on the plane and in his own heart, is just another part of life. He doesn't need to have everything figured out or be able to control every situation to make a difference. Sometimes, all it takes is the courage to keep going, to hold on to what he believes in, even when the world around him is uncertain. The turbulence eventually subsides, but the boy's understanding of his own power does not. He has come to see that he is capable of effecting change, not because he has all the answers, but because he is willing to be vulnerable, to offer something real to those around him. His voice, once just a tool for expression, has become a symbol of hope, something that others can turn to in times of difficulty. This realization is profound. The boy's journey is no longer about proving himself, but about accepting that he has something valuable to offer. He is not just a passive observer of the world, he is an active participant, someone who has the ability to influence the lives of others in meaningful ways. This newfound understanding doesn't change the turbulence in the air, but it changes how he faces it. It gives him a sense of purpose, a reason to continue singing, even when the road ahead is uncertain. The plane may continue on its journey, and the passengers may return to their seats, but the boy has been transformed. In the face of turbulence, both literal and emotional, he has discovered that his voice has power. Not just to soothe others, but to soothe himself. In a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable, the boy now knows that the most valuable thing he can offer is not perfection or control, but a willingness to be vulnerable and authentic. And that, in itself, is a gift. The boy's heart is still racing, though the turbulence has passed, leaving a strange calm in its wake. The plane's engines hum steadily, the once chaotic atmosphere now replaced by a quieter tension. He sits in his seat, fingers tightly gripping the armrest, still absorbing the weight of the moment. His song had been a small act, an impromptu performance amidst the chaos, but its effects ripple outward in ways he hadn't anticipated. As the applause begins, some passengers clap enthusiastically, while others shout words of praise. The boy's chest tightens with a mixture of pride and discomfort. He's caught in an internal struggle, his emotions tangled. He had simply sung to break the tension, to offer a moment of peace in the midst of uncertainty, yet now he finds himself the center of attention. The clapping continues for a few moments, the sound of appreciation echoing around him. He forces a smile, unsure of how to respond. Should he bow? Should he thank them? But he remains motionless, his hands still clutching the seat. What was he supposed to do now? This attention, this recognition, it feels strange to him. His whole life, he has lived on the outskirts, watching from the sidelines. He never sought out the spotlight, and the idea of being noticed, of being admired, unsettles him. He doesn't know how to process the sudden shift in focus, the way people's eyes linger on him as if waiting for something more. It's as if, for a brief moment, he's stepped into a different world, one where his actions matter in ways he hadn't considered. The boy's thoughts race. Some of the passengers are still talking about him, mentioning how his voice was beautiful or how he'd brought a sense of calm to the storm. Their words are kind, but they don't sit well with him. He didn't sing for the praise, but now that it's come, it feels like too much, too sudden, too overwhelming. He feels exposed, vulnerable. He wonders if they truly understand why he sang, or if they are merely projecting their own desires onto him. To them, it was a moment of relief, a brief escape from the fear and turbulence that had surrounded them. But to him, it was something different, a private, personal act that was never meant to be shared. He looks around at the other passengers. Some are still wiping their brows, clearly relieved that the worst is over. Their anxiety has been replaced with a sense of gratitude, but the boy is unsure whether he should feel the same. He hasn't shared in the same collective experience as the others. He hasn't fully let go of the tension. His heart is still tight, still bracing for something that hasn't arrived yet. His performance, his song, it was supposed to be a release, but it's left him feeling more exposed than he expected. As the applause dies down, he feels the weight of silence settling around him. The passengers return to their seats, some lost in their own thoughts, others chatting quietly. Yet the boy remains restless, caught in a whirlwind of emotions. He feels a strange kind of loneliness now, an isolation that wasn't there before. The world around him has shifted. Before, he was just another face in the crowd, unnoticed and unobtrusive. Now, he's something different, someone people will remember. And that thought terrifies him. His mind drifts back to the moment before he sang, to the fear that had gripped him when the turbulence began. It had been like the world was falling apart around him, and in the face of that fear, he had done something impulsive, something instinctive. He had sung, not to be heard, but to calm himself. To find some anchor in the storm. And yet, now that the storm has passed, he wonders if the act was enough. Did it change anything? Did it make a difference? Or was it just a fleeting moment, a distraction, that offered no real substance? The boy feels torn between two worlds now. The one he has always known, quiet, unnoticed, comfortable in the background, and the one that now seems to be thrust upon him. The spotlight. The expectation. The pressure to live up to something, to continue to be something more than what he was before. He never asked for this. He never wanted it. But now, the world seems to have changed, and he's unsure of how to fit into it. As the minutes stretch on, his thoughts become more fragmented. He thinks about the people who had clapped, the ones who had smiled at him, the ones who had whispered words of admiration. What did they want from him? Did they expect him to sing again, to continue providing comfort and peace? Or had they simply needed a brief escape, a moment of relief in a world that had been chaotic and uncertain? The boy's hands begin to tremble. He places them on his lap, trying to steady them. His mind drifts to the future, to the inevitable questions he'll face once they land. What will they say to him then? Will they still see him as the boy who sang during the turbulence, or will he fade back into the background, forgotten once the moment passes? He can't help but feel the weight of those expectations. They are subtle but heavy, like an invisible hand pressing down on his chest. The more he tries to push it away, the more it seems to grow. What if he can't live up to whatever they think he is now? What if he disappoints them? What if he fails to be the person they believe him to be? The thought is unbearable. As the flight continues, he becomes more aware of the passengers around him, their conversations, their expressions. He feels like a stranger among them, as if he no longer belongs in the same world he was part of before. The turbulence had brought them together in a shared moment of fear, but now that the storm has passed, the boy feels disconnected from them, as if they are all moving forward while he remains stuck in the aftermath. He catches sight of the flight attendants moving down the aisles, their faces polite but distant. They, too, seem to have returned to their roles, their duties, as though nothing had changed. But to him, everything has changed. He feels it deep within him, this shift, this change in how the world sees him, how it expects him to be. And he doesn't know if he can live up to it. The boy closes his eyes, taking a deep breath, trying to calm the swirling thoughts in his mind. The world around him feels strange, unfamiliar. The plane hums steadily, but the turbulence within him rages on, a storm he can't seem to escape. The flight continues on its steady course, the hum of the airplane's engines filling the cabin with a soft, unrelenting noise. For the boy, however, the world outside the small window seems distant and unfocused, a blur of clouds and endless sky. His mind is occupied with thoughts far more pressing, a storm of self-doubt and uncertainty swirling inside him. The boy had always felt a sense of invisibility, an absence that made him feel disconnected from the world around him. At home, his family's poverty had cast a long shadow over everything. His father's struggles, his mother's tireless work, and the constant stress of making ends meet had left little room for him to exist outside the confines of mere survival. In his community, he was just another face in the crowd, unremarkable, easily overlooked. Even when he tried to speak up or make himself known, the words often felt hollow, as if they disappeared into the air, unheard and unacknowledged. Yet, there was something in him, a voice that had always been there, waiting to be heard. His singing, which had always been a private comfort, had unexpectedly brought him some attention during the flight. The passengers had responded to it, a ripple of connection spreading through the cabin. In that moment, he felt seen for the first time in a long while, his voice serving as a bridge between himself and the world. But as the flight progresses, the boy's mind begins to spiral. Was it just a fluke? Had he somehow tricked himself into thinking that this was something more than it was? Perhaps his singing had simply been a pleasant distraction for the passengers, nothing more than a momentary reprieve from their own thoughts. He wonders if he truly has a gift. Could this be a turning point, a sign that his life could be different? Or was it simply a fleeting, isolated incident that would soon fade from memory? The boy doesn't have answers, and that uncertainty gnaws at him, deepening his internal struggle. His voice had always been a quiet, intimate part of himself, something shared only with those closest to him. Now, the possibility of it being something larger, something that could be recognized and valued, feels overwhelming. Could he really step into the light, let others hear him, see him for who he truly is? His internal conflict grows more intense as he reflects on the weight of his past. He had always dreamed of a better life, of breaking free from the constraints of his upbringing, but those dreams often felt like distant illusions. There were days when he felt hopeful, when he imagined himself standing on a stage, singing for an audience that understood him. But those moments were fleeting, easily swallowed up by the crushing reality of his circumstances. It was easier to hide, to remain unseen, to avoid the judgment and rejection that might come with stepping out of the shadows. At the same time, though, there was a yearning deep within him, a desire to do something more with his life than just exist. His singing had always been a form of escape, a way for him to express the emotions and dreams that he could never speak aloud. It was a silent rebellion against the limitations that had been placed on him by his background, a way to assert his worth even when the world refused to acknowledge it. In this moment, as he sat on the plane, he realized that his singing had the potential to be something greater than a quiet rebellion. It could be his voice in the world, his chance to prove to himself and others that he mattered. But with that realization came the overwhelming fear of failure. If he put himself out there, if he dared to dream beyond the walls of his small life, what if it all fell apart? What if the world rejected him just as it had rejected so many others from his community? What if his voice wasn't enough? His mind races with worst-case scenarios, each one more terrifying than the last. The boy can't help but feel torn. On one hand, the comfort of his humble life of being unnoticed, unremarkable offers a safety that feels impossible to leave behind. He knows the rhythms of his life, the quiet predictability of his family's struggles, the familiar faces in his community who understand the daily grind of survival. There, he is safe, invisible, and anonymous. But there is also a part of him that feels suffocated by this anonymity, as if his existence is limited to just surviving, to being nothing more than a shadow in the background of other people's lives. Should he step forward, expose himself to the world, and risk everything for the chance to pursue his passion? Or should he retreat, keep his singing to himself, and remain in the quiet comfort of his obscurity? This is the question that haunts him as the flight stretches on, the turbulence of his emotions mirroring the turbulence of the plane. His mind cycles through the possibilities, each one seeming both thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. He thinks of the people on the plane who had been touched by his voice. It was a fleeting moment, a brief interaction, but it had made him feel like he was more than just a background character in the lives of others. He wonders if that could be his reality, if he could use his voice to make an impact, to reach others in the way he had unknowingly reached those passengers. But the boy also knows that stepping into the spotlight would require more than just courage. It would require him to confront the insecurities, the self-doubt, and the fear that had kept him in the shadows for so long. It's then that the boy realizes something important. His singing isn't just about the external validation, the applause, or the recognition. It's about him finally giving himself permission to be seen, to take up space in the world, to claim his own worth. His voice is a reflection of who he is, not just of his talents but of his desire to be more than what he's been told he is. The boy doesn't have to wait for permission from others. He doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. His worth is intrinsic, and it's time for him to start believing it. As the plane continues to cut through the clouds, the boy's internal struggle begins to quiet. The noise in his head slowly fades, replaced by a quiet sense of clarity. He may not have all the answers yet, but for the first time, he begins to feel like he's on the edge of something real, something worth pursuing. The weight of his past, his fears, and his doubts may still be there, but they no longer define him. For the first time in his life, the boy is ready to step forward, to let his voice be heard, and to finally be seen. The boy sat quietly, the noise of the bustling city around him fading into the background. His thoughts raced, but for the first time, they weren't filled with fear or doubt. Instead, he felt an overwhelming sense of clarity. The music had always been a part of him, yet he had spent so many years running from it. The pressure, the uncertainty, the fear of failure, it had all held him back. But now, he was ready to face it head on. He had always known he was different. From the moment he picked up the instrument as a child, there was an undeniable spark in him. The way the music flowed through him, how it seemed to connect to something deep within. Yet, despite his natural gift, he had lived in constant conflict with himself. His family's struggles weighed heavily on him, and he had been convinced that he had no time for dreams. The need to survive, to help support those he loved, had always come first. But as he watched the people around him, some with similar struggles and others simply lost in their own lives, he realized something crucial: he didn't have to choose between his family and his passion. He could honor both. His decision had been coming for a while now, but the performance earlier that day had solidified it. The people he had played for, the strangers who had listened to his music with rapt attention, had been moved. That spark he had always felt had finally been seen by others. It was more than just validation, it was a moment of realization. He didn't have to keep hiding his gift in the shadows. He didn't have to live in fear of what could go wrong. He had the power to make a choice, and that choice could change his life. But the reality of what that would mean for him was stark. Pursuing his passion, embracing his gift, would come with sacrifices. He would have to step out of the small world he had known for so long, a world where comfort and routine were his anchors. His family, for all their love, didn't fully understand his need to follow his dreams. They saw his music as a distraction, an escape from the harshness of their reality. They wanted him to focus on getting a job, making money, and securing a future for himself. They loved him, but they also feared for him. Fear had always been a constant in his home: fear of failure, fear of the unknown, fear of taking risks. It was easy to fall in line with that fear, to hide behind the safety of what was familiar. But now, as the boy thought about it, he realized that the world around him wasn't going to wait for him to be ready. The opportunities to make a difference, to find his place in the world, wouldn't just appear. He had to take action. The clock was ticking, and if he didn't make a move now, he might never get another chance. He could keep dreaming, or he could take the first step toward turning those dreams into reality. There was no middle ground anymore. The boy knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. In fact, it would likely be filled with more struggles and hardships than he could imagine. But for the first time, he wasn't afraid. His heart was set on the future, and the possibilities seemed endless. He was ready to take on whatever came next. There would be days when it felt too hard, days when doubt crept in. But he knew that the only way out was through. Seeking advice seemed like the logical next step. He needed guidance, and he needed to know how to make his passion into something sustainable. He couldn't do it alone. He had always tried to navigate life by himself, but this time, he knew he needed to rely on others. He looked around and saw a few passengers who had been watching him. They were individuals he had briefly encountered during his performances, people who had recognized his talent and were genuinely moved by what he had done. They were strangers, but there was an unspoken understanding between them. They saw something in him, something he had long struggled to see in himself. Approaching them, the boy hesitated for a moment. But then he spoke, his voice steady yet filled with the nervous energy of someone ready to take a leap. He told them about his dreams, his gift, and the fear that had held him back for so long. He spoke of the sacrifices he would have to make, of the uncertainty that loomed over him like a cloud. The passengers listened intently, and after a pause, one of them spoke up. "You're not alone in this," the man said. "Many of us have faced the same kind of choice. The world can be a cruel place, and sometimes, it's easier to stay where it's safe. But if you truly believe in your music, in what you have to offer, you'll find a way. Don't be afraid to take that step." His words resonated deeply with the boy. He had always felt like an outsider, someone who didn't quite fit in, but hearing these strangers speak about their own struggles and dreams gave him the courage to continue. the boy was reminded that no one who had ever accomplished anything great had done it alone. Everyone needed help, needed guidance, needed others to believe in them when they couldn't believe in themselves. Together, the boy and the passengers began to outline a plan. They talked about the practical steps: how to reach out to those who could offer him opportunities, how to showcase his talent in a way that would draw attention, how to stay grounded even when success seemed elusive. The plan was still rough, still in its infancy, but it was a plan nonetheless. It was a start, and for the first time in his life, that felt like enough. The boy felt a wave of relief wash over him. The weight of uncertainty hadn't disappeared, but now, he could see a way forward. He no longer felt like he was stumbling in the dark, hoping to find his way. Instead, he had a clear direction, a roadmap to follow. The steps might be small, and there would undoubtedly be setbacks along the way, but at least now he had something to hold onto. As the conversation drew to a close, the boy thanked the passengers, grateful for their insight and support. He knew that his journey was just beginning, and he was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, it was also full of promise. With a newfound sense of determination, the boy walked away, his heart light and his mind focused. He wasn't running from his passion anymore. He had made the choice to embrace it, to follow it wherever it might lead. The world might not wait for him, but he was finally ready to take that first step. The boy was no longer afraid of the unknown. He was ready to create his own future, one note at a time. The descent of the plane was a momentary relief for the boy, yet the pressure inside him only intensified. He could feel the vibrations of the aircraft beneath him, but his mind was elsewhere, focused on the opportunity that had just been thrust upon him. It was a moment he had never expected, a chance to perform in front of a crowd, something he had once dreamed about but never truly believed would come to pass. As the plane's wheels began to lower, the hum of the engines fading into the background, the boy could still hear the words from the influential figure, a music producer seated a few rows ahead of him. The man had overheard him singing softly to himself, his voice rising and falling in the rhythm of the journey, and had approached him with an offer that seemed too surreal to comprehend. "I run a talent show in the city we're landing in. You've got something special, kid. You should come sing for us," the man had said with a tone of authority, but also with an encouraging warmth that immediately put him at ease. His heart had skipped a beat. What was this? Could this truly be happening? The boy had always known he had a voice, but the reality of performing in front of strangers was another matter altogether. He had spent years hiding behind the security of anonymity, singing only when no one was watching, in the quiet of his room, or maybe at the back of a crowd where no eyes could pierce his self-doubt. Now, a stranger, a powerful figure in the industry, was offering him a stage. As the seatbelt sign blinked on, signaling that they were approaching their destination, a sense of unease began to settle within him. This was his chance, but it was also the culmination of every fear and hesitation he had ever felt about stepping into the spotlight. The pressure wasn't just external, it was internal. For years, he had avoided pushing himself out of his comfort zone, always holding back because of the nagging thought that perhaps he wasn't good enough. What if he failed? What if his voice cracked, or worse, what if he choked? The flight attendants moved through the cabin, preparing passengers for landing, but the boy barely noticed. His mind was racing with every possibility, every outcome, from the thrill of being discovered to the humiliation of bombing in front of an audience. The music industry was ruthless, or so he had heard, and failure here could be final. Then came the moment when the plane touched down, and the noise of the landing gear hitting the tarmac jolted him back to reality. They had arrived. He had a choice to make. It was as if time slowed, his body frozen in place for a moment, paralyzed by the enormity of what he was about to do. He could feel the heat of his palms, his heart pounding in his chest. For a moment, he wished he could turn back, pretend it was all just a dream, but the voice of the producer, that familiar tone, echoed in his mind, "You've got something special." Stepping off the plane, the boy followed the crowd toward the waiting buses. He tried to ignore the feeling of being out of his element, the alien sense of being just another face among thousands, but it was impossible. His mind was still focused on the decision he needed to make. When they reached the venue, the atmosphere shifted. There was a palpable buzz in the air, a mix of excitement and anticipation. People milled about, discussing their performances, warming up, or chatting with friends. The boy was swept into the crowd, but he felt distant, as if he was looking in from the outside. This was not the world he was accustomed to. The stage, the lights, the cameras, it all felt overwhelming, and for a split second, he wondered if he could turn around and walk away. But then he remembered the look on the producer's face, the genuine encouragement that had sparked a fire in him. This was his moment. No more hiding, no more running from what he had always dreamed of. His hands were still clammy, his thoughts were jumbled, but the desire to rise above it all, to prove something to himself, burned stronger than the fear. When his name was finally called, it felt like time stopped. The boy stepped into the spotlight, his heart still racing, but a strange sense of calm began to wash over him. The audience was a blur, their faces distant shadows. What mattered now wasn't their judgment, but his connection to the music. The moment was no longer about impressing anyone, but about finding the strength within himself to sing from his heart. He took a deep breath, adjusted the mic, and the first note came out with more ease than he had expected. It was a shaky start, but the sound of his own voice seemed to ground him. He had always been told that singing was about expressing emotion, but now he understood the true weight of that, how vulnerable it made him, how exposed he felt with every breath. Yet, paradoxically, it also made him stronger, because in that moment, his vulnerability became his power. The music swelled around him, and the boy allowed himself to get lost in it. As the melody unfolded, the fear that had gripped him began to melt away. He wasn't thinking about the judgment of the audience anymore. He wasn't worrying about the potential failure that had plagued him for so long. Instead, he was just singing, pouring everything he had into the song, releasing all the years of self-doubt, the insecurities that had once defined him. The performance was raw, filled with emotion, but also with an undeniable sense of determination. It wasn't perfect, not in the traditional sense. There were moments when his voice faltered, when his breath caught, but there was a purity to it, a sincerity that could not be ignored. The audience could feel it. They didn't just hear a boy singing, they felt the weight of his journey, the struggles he had overcome, and the dreams he was finally giving himself permission to chase. When the last note echoed into the silence, the boy stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what would come next. The room was still. And then, slowly, the applause began. It was hesitant at first, but it grew stronger, the recognition of something authentic, something real. The boy didn't know what the future held, whether this was the start of something new, or just a fleeting moment of success. But he knew one thing: this was the moment he would look back on. It wasn't about winning or losing, but about having the courage to stand there and let his voice be heard. This was the first step into a new chapter, one where he no longer allowed fear to silence him. He had finally found his voice, and with it, he had found himself. The boy's performance during the competition was a pivotal moment, a culmination of all the hard work, practice, and internal struggle that had defined his journey up until that point. Though he did not win, the way he carried himself on stage and the raw emotion he conveyed through his music resonated with the audience in ways that a simple victory could not. The boy's true victory lay in the transformation that occurred within him. He had always been the quiet, overlooked boy, unsure of his own abilities. His family, while loving, had never fully understood his passion for music, and his peers had often dismissed him as insignificant. For years, he had walked through life with a sense of invisibility, uncertain of how to find his place in a world that seemed to overlook him at every turn. The stage, however, had given him a chance to show not just his talent, but his soul, to the world. When he had first stepped onto the stage, he had been filled with nerves. The spotlight was intense, and the pressure of the competition weighed heavily on him. Yet, as he began to play, something shifted. The music flowed through him, no longer a mere set of notes and rhythms to be played, but a reflection of his heart. Each note seemed to shed the layers of doubt he had carried for so long. It was as if the boy had unlocked a new dimension of himself, one that had been hidden beneath the surface all this time. The audience, the judges, and his family watched with a mix of surprise and admiration. The boy's performance was far from perfect, but it was authentic. His nerves were apparent, yet they only added to the rawness and honesty of his music. In that moment, he was no longer just a boy with potential, he was an artist. His performance became a powerful statement, one that communicated his growth and self-discovery in a way words could not. When the competition ended, the boy did not walk away with the first place trophy, but he walked away with something far more valuable: his sense of self-worth. For the first time in his life, he felt seen and heard. The judges, while not awarding him the top prize, recognized the depth of his talent. They knew that he had something special, something that could not be measured by a score or a ribbon. They saw in him the potential for greatness, the kind of greatness that went beyond technical skill and precision. It was the kind of greatness that stemmed from the courage to be vulnerable, to share one's true self with the world. His family, too, had a newfound respect for him. Throughout the competition, they had cheered him on with a mixture of hope and doubt. They loved him, but they hadn't fully understood his obsession with music, nor had they realized how much it meant to him. They had seen his struggles but never quite grasped the weight of them. But now, as they watched him stand tall after his performance, they understood. They understood that this was more than just a competition for their son. It was a manifestation of his dreams, his hard work, and his determination to overcome everything that had held him back. The boy had gained their respect in a way that went beyond familial love, he had earned their admiration. The passengers, too, had recognized the shift in him. Earlier in the story, they had been mere bystanders to his life, offering fleeting moments of support or indifference. But now, they saw something different in the boy. His transformation was not just a personal victory, it was a communal one. His courage had inspired them, whether they realized it or not. He had shown them what it meant to take risks, to put one's heart into something despite the fear of failure. In that moment, the boy had not only become an artist in his own right, he had become a symbol of hope for others who struggled with self-doubt. As the boy walked away from the event, he felt a sense of peace he had never experienced before. He was no longer the boy who had hidden in the shadows, unsure of his place in the world. He had stepped into the light and, in doing so, had discovered that he was worthy of it. The applause that had filled the air, though not for him alone, echoed in his heart, reminding him that he had done something far more important than win a competition. He had proven to himself that he was capable of greatness, that he was enough. This newfound confidence was not just a temporary feeling, it was a deep, lasting change. It was a shift in the way he saw himself and the world around him. For the first time, he felt like he was in control of his destiny, that he was no longer a passive participant in his own life. He had taken charge, made his mark, and shown that he could handle whatever came next. The boy's journey was far from over. The competition, though important, had only been one chapter in his life. There would be other challenges, other obstacles to overcome, but he now understood that these were not things to fear. They were opportunities for growth, for further self-discovery. The boy had learned that failure was not the end, but a part of the process. His performance in the competition had taught him that success was not just about winning, but about the journey itself, the courage to continue even when the outcome was uncertain. With this new understanding, the boy looked ahead to the future not with trepidation, but with excitement. He was no longer afraid of what might come his way. He had learned to trust himself, to believe in his own abilities. His confidence was not built on the approval of others, but on his own belief that he was capable of achieving whatever he set his mind to. And so, as the boy walked away from the event, he did so with a sense of hope, knowing that he was ready for whatever came next. His journey had only just begun, but he was no longer afraid to face the unknown. He was no longer the quiet, overlooked boy he once was. He was a young man filled with potential, eager to step into the next chapter of his life with the knowledge that he had the power to shape his own future.